Good evening, everybody, and welcome. My name is Cynthia, and I help direct the events here at Strand. And for a little bit of history, Strand was founded in 1927 by the Bass family over on 4th Avenue's Book Row. Stretching from Union Square to Astor Place, Book Row gradually dwindled until, after over 91 years, Strand is the sole survivor, still run by the Bass family and still housing new and used books. Tonight, we're excited to welcome Shawna Potter to discuss Making Spaces Safer, newly published by AK Press. It draws on her experience as a musician in the band War on Women and as an activist with the Safer Spaces campaign to create a guide for making workplaces, venues, and everywhere in between safe for all people. It's a painfully necessary antidote to the pervasive problems of public spaces. Joining Shawna to discuss it is fellow musician and activist Meredith Graves, who additionally runs independent music label Honor Press and serves as director of music for the crowdfunding site Kickstarter. Please join me in welcoming them to Strand.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here.
Hi, everybody. How are you? Thank you all for coming out to the Strand tonight. It's really, really an honor to be here. I don't just mean tonight. I mean the 16 times a month I come up with an excuse to stop in here and spend all my money. Thanks to the Strand. You guys are the OGs. Go downstairs and lick the occult books before you leave. Unfortunately, as mentioned, I am Meredith Graves, the director of music at Kickstarter, former host of MTV News, incredibly fed up with the world's bullshit, which is why I'm so pleased to be joined tonight by Shawna Potter from War on Women, and of course the author of this wonderful book, which I'm hoping most of you are holding. So, what day is this of the book tour?
2.
And you were in Boston last night, right?
Yeah.
How did that go?
It was great. It was in a small record store called Armageddon Shop, and I just kind of posted up in the corner by a big poster of Ozzy Osbourne and talked about Safer Spaces to everybody that was there.
Very, very fascinating. I want to jump in right there, too, because I had an experience in Boston at a club that will remain nameless, where at the time I reacted in the way that I thought was best. Someone got physically hurt, and it was at a large show, and there were club people. Anyway, it was a situation at a show. Yeah. And at the time, I did the best that I could, but I remember thinking, God, I wish I knew what to do first. So because your book is so action-packed, every sentence could be a book in and of itself. It's useful, it's facts-based. In safer spaces, or when we want to make safer spaces, where is the first place a person could start? What's a gut check? What's a good first thing to do?
I think, so you were the victim in this circumstance?
My band was playing. I needed to help somebody in the audience.
Oh, okay. Because I do think that the responsibility of a victim of harassment is different than the responsibility of bystanders. I would never tell a victim how to respond, what the right response is to being harassed or assaulted or anything. But I think that everyone around them, people witnessing it, can support them. And basically, my rule of thumb is you don't want to escalate the violence or make it worse for the victim in the long run. You don't want to have it come back to them. So any way to calm the situation down is going to further protect the victim. And so sometimes, even though we'd like to punch someone out, it means calming things down, talking reasonably, friending the harasser for a minute just so that they stop puffing up their chest and they take a minute,
So even just in that wonderful and concise and expert answer, you've helped to illustrate what a safer space actually is. And what we're holding in our hands tonight is a wonderful guide on how to create them, as they are so imperative to our community. But before we get into more of that, first, can you give me a good, outline, paraphrasing, what constitutes a safer space? Why do we need them?
I think anyone that's paying attention at all, or anyone here probably knows why we need them, right? We need them because we can't rely on anyone else to create a safer space for us. We can't rely on people in power to protect us, even if it's in the Constitution that we should be protected. So if we can't rely on anyone else, we have to rely on ourselves. And that means that we have to do some of the work, right? So a safer space is just a place where people can go and be themselves and be free of violence. And knowing that there are jerks everywhere, shit happens. Someone, of course, is going to be harassed. We're not going to eradicate it fully, even if everyone read this book, right? But that means that when it does happen, everyone else around the victim has their back and knows how to intervene in a safe way and shut it down and just let people know you can't do that here. So it's not a free speech thing.
You bring up an erudite and important point that I'd like to return to quickly, which is that even if the Constitution deems that we are, in fact, supposed to be safe, it's so funny that this piece of paper that was written by a group of white dudes in the 1700s isn't somehow still miraculously effective.
It's not enough.
Somehow, crazy thing, it's not enough. And to that point, Shawna, if things aren't safe, why don't we just call the cops?
Yeah. Because they do not make them safe either.
Right. So this book is fantastic, not just because it's oriented towards autonomy and small community organizing and radical approaches to safety, interpersonal approaches to safety that start from a praxis of the community ourselves knowing best. It also, while touching on it, doesn't make open suggestions or command people in any way call the police. Why is that?
The police do not have a history of de-escalating situations. And I live in Baltimore, and we lost someone named Freddie Gray. And we know in our town that the cops don't always make things better, and they often make them worse. So what if we didn't need them? What if we didn't need them, the government, Cheetos in office, whatever? What if we could do it ourselves? And the thing is, we can. We don't need them. Again, for a victim, I would never say what they could or couldn't do. If calling the cops is right for them in that moment, go for it. But for a bystander to instantly call the cops just when they see any trouble at all, without knowing what's going on, without knowing the immigration status of the victim, without knowing if there's any drugs in their system, voluntarily or otherwise, without knowing what's up with that victim, you could be causing more trauma. And, also in Baltimore, we have a large trans population. And so to just call the cops on any trans person, but especially black trans women, guess who's going to be messed with and harassed further by cops? Guess who's probably going to be arrested in that situation? It's not going to be the cool white guy in khakis or whatever. No offense to khakis.
Cops in khakis, though, we're out. So let's take it back a little bit. You are clearly passionate about this work, an expert in this work. You've put in what is the figure that they often throw out, 10,000 expert hours. You've toured, you have run remediation workshops, you've coached venues, you've made all of these brilliant materials, you've edited and compiled them down into this concise volume with an appendix in the back for people's use. Where was the origin point for this? At what point did you realize that this work was the work you wanted to do with your life?
So I'm actually a Jane of all trades, master of none. That's what I consider myself. So I do a lot of things, and this is one of my big passions. And I stepped back from my activism with Hollaback in order to concentrate more fully on war on women. Like, we were just getting good opportunities, and I wanted to see what would happen, because that stuff can disappear like that, right? So, but I couldn't step away completely. I had to keep training venues. I loved doing it so much. I loved seeing the look on people's faces when things clicked, when things started to make sense for them, when they started to come up with their own ideas. It's a really beautiful thing to be part of that process. So I kept doing that, and after doing a Safer Space Bystander Intervention Workshop on Warped Tour the summer of 2017, and being worried about losing my voice because I was talking and yelling every single day for 2 months, I just thought, I should just write all this down. I'm saying the same things over and over again to all these people. What if I just wrote it down? And then I was like, what if I just wrote it down? And when we got home, it was one of those, like, you wake up in the middle of the night and you have an idea and you have to get it out. And I totally just woke up, turned on a little flashlight in the living room, and just like, argh. And that was the beginning of the pocket guide, which came right before this full-length book.
What was the process like of deciding which information was going to be included in the text? Would you say this is generally the total output of what you would give, say, a venue that comes to you and says, hey, we'd like to know how to make our venue a safer space? Is this the total material?
Yeah, I would say that this would cover the pocket guide is like the bare bones version of like, okay, here's your to-do list for this week. Just get it done. You'll be fine. That's a really great start. And then this version could answer any of the random weird questions I would get in workshops that's not even necessarily like, how do I tell a harasser to please stop? It's when people are asking, but why does this happen? And what's the stat on that? And, you know, people that doubt you and they just have a hump to get over. This is all the information they would need to realize, one, how important this actually is for them to do and how much power they actually have to do it.
So again, because the book is so concise and so information-packed, and every single sentence could explain or solve theoretically an entire situation or turn a person's whole way of thinking around, while the book is written in an order that is viable and practical and important, you could pick this up and follow along if you were stressed and in a situation you've never dealt with before. It's also kind of a master primer, where depending on what kind of you stress a number of times throughout the book that like all of the first chapter and a half is for before stuff happens, and then there's a line where okay, you realize something has happened and you're already jumping in, things like that. Every single line in the book has within it some sort of edict or action, or it's a tool, or it's part of like a skill set that people can walk away with.
Someone filming this, because like this is high praise, and I just want a record of this.
If no one is, then I need it confirmed that camera paid for its ticket.
Okay, all right.
Hi.
Wow.
What up?
Just thanks. I mean, okay, keep going.
Hey, I mean, this is, and I don't know, has anyone else who's currently in the room had the opportunity to finish the entire book off yet? Cool, so it's not Game of Thrones, no spoilers, but it's a great action-packed book that you could pick up and read like the Farmer's Almanac. It's basically an instruction manual for dealing with buttfuckery, and if you don't want to put up with that, you pick up this book, you crack it open in the middle, and every other sentence tells you how to give some asshole the boot, right? But what if you're a venue, and what if you're an established venue who's, the one thing that we come up, I'm trying not to like lean on hardcore, because while it may be both of our mutual backgrounds, it's not everybody's. And another great thing about this great book, with this being filmed commentary about the great book that is great, is that it speaks to a universal audience. I mean, our praxis comes out of hardcore, but this book works for everyone, right? Venues with different ideologies. Because, when opportunities open up for us, when you're in the punk and hardcore band that's just like the 18th band you've ever done, but it's the one that mainstream music picks up on, and suddenly you're playing festivals like Warped Tour, and you're like, I used to make fun of this shit. Weird. Okay, cool. And then you're also, let's face it, when you step over into the mainstream echelons, you're that much more likely to encounter sketch behavior, I think. And hardcore's bad, but mainstream world, really bad. You come across an organizing committee at a venue. Someone at a venue calls you, but the rest of the people aren't on board. How do you start to rally the troops? If we're talking about, because something that does come out of hardcore is like, well, it's just always been this way and you got to deal with it. Or like, oh, he's always just been like that. Or this venue's just going to be like that. Dangerous shit happens here. We mosh, bro. Like that kind of stuff. What do you do when you meet an uneven group? What do you do when you come up against a bias-based resistance where like there's a majority negative?
Yeah, I'm actually really lucky I haven't had that experience yet. Most people that want me to train their venue or their group, everyone's on board, and maybe one or two, like 10%, worst case, are like resistant. I wouldn't even say that they're shut off, but they're just like, convince me, And I like to think that by the end of a workshop, I do, because I don't tell anyone, you've been doing this wrong, and here's what you got to do, shape up or ship out. I say, what works? Here's some stuff. Have you tried this? And you know what? You're already doing such great work. What if you added this other thing to it? And just giving them tools that are actionable and reasonable, and not in a judgmental way, hopefully in a really kind way, because I want everyone to come over to the side. And if it is in the hardcore world, then I can remind them, sometimes punk is about punching people in the face in a mosh pit. That's fine, but that doesn't mean you don't want women or people of color or LGBTQ folks to show up at all, right? You want their money too, right? You want them to buy drinks too, right? Like, make sure they feel welcome coming in the door. and then have your little pit, and that's fine. Isn't that cute?
Yeah, everybody has we should all be able to go wherever we want and get punched in the face as much as we want.
It's a right.
Without, like, if we're all already consenting to getting punched in the face, let us do that safely. I mean, seriously. The point you bring up there is actually really interesting, and I would like to draw out that line a little bit. When you say, okay, let's say you got 10 people, 2 are dicks, and they're not on board. Oh, convince me. Well, okay, Your Honor. The tactic that you suggest of, well, hey, you might want to like check this out, is also a tactic that you suggest for dealing with bullies and assholes when you encounter them at venues. You specify that while we think of it in terms, we codify it as like fight or flight behaviors, there's actually a couple more, and I learned that from your book. Would you go on to that a little bit?
Yeah, we know fight or flight, and we know fawn, also called friend. And then freeze, we know freeze too. But fawn or friend, however you want to say it, is just, it's kind of rolling over and showing your belly and just being like, we're cool, man, everything's cool here. And buddying up to a potential harasser or bully just long enough to calm them down and probably get them out as your main goal. I've seen that a lot in security situations in bars and clubs, because when you're dealing with multiple very large people, there's that thing, especially if they're like cis men, there's that cultural expectation of we're all supposed to be tough here together. And so if one of those big guys is like, no man, I ain't tough, I ain't trying to do anything, it's really disarming and it can de-escalate the situation. But I make a point in the book of making sure that if you do go for that tactic of friending the harasser, is that you let everybody else in the venue know afterwards that you were doing a thing. That you, hey everybody, we got that guy out of here, everything's fine now, we don't tolerate that behavior in here. If it happens again, please let us know, we will handle it. I don't want anyone to think that my security friend is really good friends with that drunk asshole over there and he doesn't actually care about what just happened to me, you know? So it's just about communication, and always, if you just think to always center the victim and potential victims, because let's face it, people are watching when they see these interactions. If you always center the victim, then it's understandable that the victim might be upset to see that buddy-buddy behavior.
And in terms of centering the victim, that is obviously a huge point that you go back to over and over and over again throughout the course of the book. And where that begins, and again, the book could be theoretically read in order, and then depending on the situation, once you acquire the skills, you may have to play 52-card pickup. We clearly are here because we can't predict the behavior of jerks. But when it comes to a victim or survivor-centered model, where your book starts, and where I think a lot of us will start, is crisis care. Can you explain a little bit about that and how you came to the conclusions that you did? Because you elucidate it very well here in the text. How to identify when a person is in crisis? Because really it's like that's almost a non-negotiable. You go to the person who's suffering first. Yeah. How can you identify a crisis situation, and what can a bystander do to mediate that? What are some quick tactics? You list a lot in the book, but what are your favorites?
Well, I do want to be clear that I use the term someone's in crisis mode when someone is too upset to tell you how you can help them. You know, has anyone ever, you know, you get an argument with your partner and someone just starts bawling, surprise, it's me, spoiler alert, and I can no longer have the argument, however healthy it is, because my frontal lobe is just off. I can't understand what's happening anymore. I'm done. So we have to pause and we wait and we take care of that. Then we continue the argument. That's just normal, basic science shit.
I love how you delineate that in the book too, because you say, you know, first thing, you know, you can look for a few vital signs of a person to check if they're extremely upset or actually having a full crisis. They've dissociated, they're panicking, they're having some physical affect. And I like the way you explained it in the book, which is that when you begin to ask the crisis questions, the person may actually look up at you and go, why are you asking me all these questions? Can you please go talk to that asshole? Yeah. In which case the person is probably not in a state of crisis.
They're fine.
But if they are.
But if they are. And it can look like sobbing, like me, or they can just be zoned out, staring into space, not receptive, not really speaking in sentences that make any sense. And if that's the case, then what you want to do, the easiest thing to do if someone seems that upset is just say, hey, you know what? You seem upset. Why don't we just breathe in together? Why don't we take a deep breath in and breathe out? And do that 5 times. Who did that with me? Yeah. So the body takes over, it knows what it needs. You tell it to breathe, it'll breathe, right? So breathe in and out, that calms down your nervous system, and you can start to focus on what's going on and how to ask for help. And if they're not there yet, then you can get them to start naming things in the room, just looking around, being present. I got those who knew, that's red, the good house is yellow, and literally start naming stuff and be specific. Then the frontal lobe kind of just starts turning back on, basically. So they can ask for the help they need. So you can figure out what's really going on and how you can help.
And there are also suggestions in the book for, because the book does such a great job of operating, these rules can work, again, across a diversity of venues. There are some in here that are more specific to, like, music situations where really loud, chaotic stuff might be going on, where there's a ton of people, or, and this is one of my favorite things about the book, when there's alcohol involved. Specifically, there's a lot of great information, at least, about how the infrastructure of, like, bartenders works in Baltimore, and people will talk to each other, and they will take care of each other and share information, stuff like that. Speaking from personal experience, as someone who, and I've written about this before, I got drugged at my own band's show once. Someone slipped something into my drink. I'm really, really passionate about advising people about that, and you give a lot of really great advice here. What about for bystanders, and we'll get a little more into bystander strategy in a minute, but what if we're in the same kind of crisis situation, but the person, let's just say in general, has consumed substances, you don't know what, you don't know if it's voluntary or otherwise. What are some tips for that?
First tip, stay with them. Don't abandon them, right? See if anyone is with them. If someone is, try to see if they actually know the person or if they're just pretending because they found a target, right? Ask them, you know their name? What's their name, right? Stuff like that. Like, you can be challenging because if you're potentially protecting someone from being sexually assaulted or murdered, be a jerk to them. Why not? They'll get it. If they're really their friend, they'll be like, yes, I know Meredith, she's fine. And get them water. Delegate to someone else to get them water while you stay with them. Like, make sure they stay awake. If you can get it out, like what they've had. If it was voluntary, maybe it's really serious and you need to grab some Narcan from behind the bar. Hopefully the bar has some Narcan.
And forgive me, if you're Brooklyn-based, you're interested, if you're not familiar with Narcan, it's naloxone. It only works in cases when a person has already overdosed very, 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 very severely on narcotics, especially if you're Brooklyn-based. One place that you can get it is at the Mud Guts Gallery in Greenpoint, where they do free Narcan training every single Saturday. It's a crucial point, really important to bring up, because now there can be narcotics in just about everything, and you will encounter this at some point when you're out in the world. So just specific information for people who are based here. There are free trainings and resources available at a number of locations.
That's great. Yeah, but you want to look for someone that went from kind of sober to wasted really quickly, because that's not going to happen with one beer. And you want to make sure that they don't leave the site with a stranger, because that secondary location is where the attack is going to happen. So if you can keep an eye on them and just make sure they get home safe, then you can potentially prevent an assault.
Within the context of the book, after that, it suggests the first thing you do after nullifying any crisis situation or helping to the extent that you can, making sure the person who's having an issue has been cared for, making sure people are notified. It then suggests, and again, this is if the steps are happening in order, craziness,
Sure.
that you deal with the person who is causing the grievance, and you offer a number of strategies for dealing with these people and ways to approach them. Assuming that we all may find ourselves in a situation where we want to intervene, we want to do it safely and successfully at some point, how did you come to the conclusions you did about the options people have? Where do you think people could start? What are some of the ways that people could bust this up?
Well, there are specific options for dealing with alleged harassers if you are in charge of a space. And by in charge, I just mean representing a space, working there, volunteering there, whatever, versus you're also attending, or you're also in the audience, or you're just an actual bystander. Those are two very different paths for dealing with the jerk. So if you represent a space, the key thing is to, you give a victim options. You give them some power in a situation where their power has been taken away. and you just give them a few, give them 3 so that it's not overwhelming and it's easy to remember. And it's keep an eye out, talk to the person, or kick them out. And then there are other tactics for dealing with the harasser if you're just a bystander, and that's just basic bystander intervention, the 5 Ds of bystander intervention. So if you've ever heard of those, that's what you do. And within those 2 realms, you're going to have something that applies to basically every situation and every personality type, every sense of safety that you might have, whatever's going on, there will always be something that you can do. And that's what I hope another big takeaway of the book is there's always a way to help someone out and intervene.
Yeah, I want to draw that out more too, because that's another thing that I loved the most about this book was that you explain, first of all, let me back up even a little bit more. In all my years of being a soapboxing, grandstanding, save the scene kind of Tinkerbell nerd that I am, I have never seen any sort of accountability process guide or setup like this that places that step of, ask the victim what they want to do in immediate intervention. So like when we talk about a larger accountability process that's post-trauma, then it's, we have to
you need them involved.
Victim-centered. Yeah. But the instancy with which you bring this up here, asking the victim, do you want me to keep an eye on him? Do you want me to make him leave? Do you want me to talk to him? Do you want me to do this? After that, breaking it down between the people who are in charge of the venue, the people who are just in the crowd. Any of us walking down the street in New York City, we see stuff.
All the time.
All the time. And people it can be easy to misunderstand. It can be a minor grievance. It could be a person suffering from substance abuse issues. It could be a whole lot of things. If let's just say we're out in the world on an average day. What are some quick, I'm always trying to turn everything, forgive me, because I've read the book, I'm going to read it 100 more times. Always trying to turn everything into an opportunity to hear things spoken. So forgive me if you feel like I'm making you run down the text of the book.
No,
but
that's fine.
What are some snap judgment calls that people can lean on when they see something bad happening out in the world, maybe between 2 people that are strangers?
Maybe you read this book more recently than I did. Do I say anything about just pay attention?
Constantly.
First thing, just notice. Just take a minute and watch these 2 folks. You don't know what they're doing. Are they in a relationship? Are they play fighting? Are they strangers? You don't know the circumstances. Just stop and watch for a second. So you can figure out, okay, they're fine. They're laughing. Okay, it's cool, right? But if you start to notice that someone is uncomfortable, that this is not okay, whatever's happening over here is not okay, then you have those 5 Ds of bystander intervention. And I didn't invent bystander intervention. I didn't invent the 5 Ds. Frankly, I didn't invent a lot of the stuff in this book. Some stuff I did, but all of this is built on the backs of people that have been doing this for years, research that's already been done. I just wanted to put it in a package that made it now you do it, right? Make it easy for you. So that said, we have different ways to intervene. And one way is direct, to just say, don't say that here. That's harassment. Not a debate. Debate is not one of the Ds. It's not a conversation. It's just, nope, you can't do that. Another one is distract, which is the best one, in my opinion. Because you can act dumb and you can be like, look at me, and you just want to get the attention away from the harasser, or you want to distract the victim and say, you know what, don't worry about this harasser over here, I got you, right? So you just put the attention on you. You're asking for the time. When does this bus show up? I really like your shirt, whatever, it doesn't matter. Another one is delegate. So when we are really concerned about our safety because we are of a smaller size, or the harasser is just bigger than us, or we are also a marginalized person that this person seems to be targeting, you can just get someone else. And it just means asking for help. It just means saying, hey, can you come with me over here? Something weird's going on. Most people are not used to being approached, period, in public spaces. We're so used to our tunnel vision and we're just doing our thing, and you see wild things every day in this city. But if someone says, hey, I need your help, can you come over here? Most people, oh, yeah, sure, okay. And they'll figure out really quickly that they just need to be a part of the help. So I like to repeat things in my workshops. I realized I was just about to go into workshop mode. I like to repeat things because I really want it to stick. So we have direct, we have distract, We have delegate. We also have delayed. And that just means after the fact. Let's say it happened quick, or you couldn't get there in time. You can always, always, always just check in with the victim. Are you okay? I saw that. That looked really rough. Are you okay? Even a knowing glance, studies show, can reduce someone's trauma from harassment by 50%. So just being like, yep, asshole over there, something that is so huge. And I go into this in the book a little bit, but trauma is cumulative. It adds up. And for those of us that are harassed all the time for being who we are, something we can't change, it just gets to be too much sometimes. So if you can take away a little piece of that, that's such a big deal for that person you're helping. And all you had to do was say, you okay? Sorry about that. That's nothing. So always check in, always ask if someone's okay no matter what. You can always do that. And then the last tactic is to document. And that is a last resort. You want to do one of the other D's first. And if that's already being taken care of by someone else, great. Then bust out your phone, document it, and just ask the victim if they want a copy of it in case they want to use it for any reason.
And I think, and I was going to say this a second ago, and then another question popped into my head, and I got distracted because I go into student mode when I'm around wonderful teachers. I think if there is one favorite, larger existential takeaway from this book, it is that literally everyone can do something. And that is not in a, oh, come on, you lazy, good for nothings. Like, everybody can do something. No, I literally mean, like, you don't know that you have superpowers. Like, everyone can do something. And I mean, like, I am an antisocial shut-in who doesn't like physical contact, and this book gave me ideas because of the delegation thing. Now, when we talk about bystander intervention in the world of people like me who love like crime documentaries and murder shows, we always lean back on the case of Kitty Genovese, which happened like here in New York, where they say everybody sees a bunch of stuff and everybody assumes the next person is calling. And I think that presumption that that's why that happened is a little hostile to people. I think it's like a lot of people probably wouldn't make the call because we're scared. We're scared because we don't have, books like this. I think that, that idea of like delegating stuff to other people is great, but you have to be able to get there when fear kind of freezes you up. In times when, because like, if there's one thing you learn really quickly, like imposter syndrome wise, it's once you start teaching the material, you know exactly how much you don't know. And even the experts among us, like literally the very first story that you give people in the book is when you froze in front of a car. So for anyone out here who we're in our right mind, we're thinking about other people, we're trying to save the world, we're trying to fix the world, and then that dude honks his horn at us. Yeah. What do you do as the expert? What do you do first? Because if everybody can kind of do something, like, what do you do when you're totally caught off guard?
When I'm totally caught off guard, I freeze. I freeze in emergencies until someone says, hey, bop, bop, bop. And I go, oh yeah, and I spring into action, whatever the emergency is. It takes me a second. So that often leads to ignoring harassment, or it's never actually ignoring, it's just pretending to ignore it, right? So I just pretend to ignore it and keep walking and go about my day. And that is absolutely a tactic to dealing with harassment. That's not a weakness. It's not a lack of a response. It is a response. You have shit to do, Like, keep going, keep moving forward with your life. But I have at times felt that responsibility of, well, I'm writing a book about this, and I'm supposedly like a really like mean feminist in a band. Shouldn't I yell at someone, that's talking to me like that? And so I do sometimes, definitely. I just try to be conscious of my white privilege, for one, in a city that is mostly people of color, and to not make any judgments on a person, just the behavior. And so, being catcalled like you're on your way into the gym is the most recent example I can think of. Just some stuff is said, and it's not even anything that matters. That I don't even remember it. And I just said, say it to my face. And they were like, oh, and they literally went, nope, and they just like walked away. They couldn't take that. And I was like, that's what I thought. Now I'm gonna go do some pull-ups.
You see, you're really good at that, because when dudes yell at me on the street, I'll turn around and say something like, excuse me, sir, have you seen my ghost? Until they like leave me. Someone goes, hey, Ma, where you going? I go, to get my psych meds. And I keep walking.
Whatever works.
Whatever,
you know?
whatever the fuck
I do
works.
weird dances sometimes.
Yeah,
like,
you just turn around and go, Ronaldo, is that you? And you start running towards him and see what happens.
You owe me child support.
I've done all of them. Mommy! Towards some humongous man with a beard, like, I love you too. I can't wait till we tell this story to our grandchildren. You know, we met when your grandfather called me sweet ass out of a car. Like,
we deserve to have fun in these moments when we can.
And then sometimes we can't because we're terrified.
Yeah.
And sometimes we can't because we're scared. Sometimes we can't because we're scared that we're going to fuck up. We don't want to fuck up. Yeah. Like the idea of, oh, you see two people yelling at each other on the next train car. You see them, you're like, I got my bystander intervention. I know all the D's. I'm good. And then you find out that they're just goofing around.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, whatever. You don't want to fuck up. So sometimes we don't do stuff in our own life because we don't want to get fucked up. We don't want to fuck anybody else's life up. Whatever. Fine and good. Big difference. And this is where we're going to wrap. When you actually fuck up. Because your book provides advice for that.
Yeah.
None of us are perfect. Wow. What's the first thing we do when somebody comes to us and says, I read this book and I recognize that some of your behavior, Meredith, is totally dicked, and we're going to need to sit down and talk about it. What's your advice for people who may be about to sit with some really hard stuff because people in their community want them to be better?
The first thing, I think, is just to be quiet and listen. I think we're not taught these skills. We don't want to hear bad things about us, so we're not good at apologies. We get defensive. I don't want to use the word natural. I don't know that it's natural or not, but it's what we know, and it's easy. So I think the first step is just to be quiet and listen and see what this person has to say, and try not to interrupt. Let them say their piece, and then actually apologize for the thing that wasn't great, and mean it, and recognize that you hurt someone, even if it was accidental. The hurt still happened, and to be fair, like, this is something that I'm still getting better at. And it's part of me going to therapy. It's one of the things that I have to get better at, not being instantly defensive. And I'm sorry, what? Oh, now you're yelling. They're not yelling. Oh, now you're yelling at me. And like, oh, but now I'm upset. Let's care about me. No, you're upset, and I need to care about you. Let me apologize to you. So I do have some good and bad apology examples in there, just to show what it looks like to actually apologize well. And guess what was harder to find researching on the internet? A good example of an apology. It was difficult to find one. I found tons of bad apologies. But yeah, so eventually I landed on one.
I was thinking about this, and it's like, this is the really hard thing about doing this work, and we can talk about how we don't want to fuck up, and then we still don't want to fuck up, or we don't want to do anything. There's just so many levels to it. Like, we're doing the best we can. We're putting this book, we're really trying to change our communities and all of this. There's this very fascinating thing about figuring out where and when and how you fucked up and how to fix it and how it's ongoing. But there's something that you stress repeatedly in the text that it's not there's no correct expert answer, I guess. Okay. But this was a big question that the book left me with, and it might just be a rhetorical question. It might be both sides. It might be interesting question, but right at the top of the book, we talk about don't victim blame. Don't get annoyed if right after an incident someone can't explain themselves adequately. If their story seems to shift and change, if they're using the wrong words, if they're upset, if they're angry, if they're doing whatever. It just happened. Trauma can hit you really, really hard. Your first reaction might not be authentic. How do we flip that script in the lens of seeing a bad apology? If we don't understand the nature of if we're not sure, if we're just beginning the remediation process, if we're going to take victims at face value, how do we know when an apology is good enough, I guess is the correct question. if people respond after a day to allegations, we say that wasn't good enough. If they take too long, we say, well, that wasn't good enough. Someone must have written it for them. This is rushed. This isn't like, how do we know when an apology is good?
It's really complicated when you add in the urgency of the internet and a community at large witnessing something happening that they are not involved in the incident whatsoever, and it doesn't actually affect them or apply to them, you know. I try to remove that aspect and focus on the victim. Is this good enough for the victim? Does this make sense to them? And if it is part of a mediation process, and that can be as casual as you want it. It can just be 3 friends and 2 of them are having a thing and you're in the middle and you're just helping facilitate a conversation. Doesn't mean you have to go to a mediator. It looks a lot of different ways is what I'm saying. It might mean, you know, you say something and it doesn't, I kind of see what you're trying to say, but you're saying it weird and you're getting a little defensive. You know, it's on me as the not victim to say, okay, are you trying to say blah, 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 blah? And give them a chance. I think you're right. We have to recognize the humanity and just what the victim's going through, and understand that people need a chance to change and get better when it comes to someone that has caused harm. And if we don't extend that olive branch, I guess, for lack of a better word, all we do is isolate them, and all that does is serve to kind of reinforce that bad behavior. Why would they do any better if no one thinks they can anyway, and they've lost all their friends anyway? So I would encourage people that are actually close to someone that's caused harm to be that person that holds them accountable until they can hold themselves accountable. Ask them to, yeah, but what have you done for the victim? And are you going to therapy yet? And really stay on them so that they can get to the other side where they finally go, you know, it's been months, but I think I did fuck up. It's like, yes, it was a long journey, but we'll get you there, you know?
And in the meantime, you keep a firm hand on that olive branch in case you have to whip some ass. I think we're just about out of time. I'm not sure. Do we have time? Are we doing questions, or are we going to hang after? Or do we have time for a couple questions?
I got all the time in the world.
Yeah, we got a couple more minutes, and sure, yeah, and thank you. I mean, just to wrap again, I mean, hopefully these questions showed at least some of the more striking points that I was left with after a couple of reads through the book, and I'm sure that everyone here will walk away with a different takeaway. But as impossible as this may be, now that you're in the book tour, you're going to be meeting people and talking about this book and your work and all of it all at once with people. What if there is like a thesis or like a core of it or a heart of it? What would you say is like the big lesson of this book, the big like rallying cry, the big thing you want people to walk away from it with?
I think that each and every one of us is so powerful. There's so much that we can do. And that is for victims to hear, to know that like just being victimized doesn't mean you're weak. It's just a thing that happens to you. And then everybody else, or those times when we're not victim and we can be an ally to someone else, we have so much power to make a difference in someone's life and for the better. And I think that's beautiful, and it's easy, and it's bullet pointed in here. Easy to read. Hopefully you get something out of it.
And in a pinch, will double as a weapon. Also, books are powerful. All right, I think we'll open it up to questions now. Thank you for having me. This was really nice.
Thank you so much for doing this. This is really cool of you.
Thanks for writing such a brilliant book.
High five?
High five.
Okay.
Cheers.
Yeah.
Thanks for doing this. So my question is, how pervasive do you think these kinds of scenarios that you're addressing with this book, I mean, how pervasive are they? Is the kind of thing where at any of your shows or Meredith shows, like, is there something going on that should be addressed? Or, you know, how common is it? You know, Meredith was talking before about how it's the difference between maybe in a hardcore show versus an indie show or or indie rock show. So I don't know if you have any.
I do have some thoughts on that. It is pervasive enough that it could happen at any time, and that's kind of the rub of it. I'm walking around in my life, and anyone else marginalized experiencing harassment knows it could happen at any time. Is this the time? Is it going to happen now? And so, we're constantly expecting it. It's constantly in the back of our mind. We're constantly planning for it, even if we don't know that we're doing it. And then when it does happen, it can still be shocking and kind of throw you off and take you out of your thoughts and your life. So I'll go periods of time where it won't happen for months and months and months, and then it'll be like 10 times in one day. It's just so random. It's almost worse. If I just knew it was going to happen at 10 a.m. every day, I'd be like, all right, now it's over. I can live my life. Cool. But it's not, like Meredith was saying, it's not a hardcore thing. It's not a punk thing. It's not an indie. It's not a rock thing. It's not a rap thing. It's not a country thing. It's an everywhere thing, all the time thing, always possible thing. And the more the studies are showing that just the more people you have in a square mile, the more likely harassment to happen. The more people, the more likely. That's it. So you just got to be, in a town like this, you got to be ready for it.
Hi. I was wondering if you had any recommendations for how to put pressure on venues and other spaces that maybe one attends but doesn't actively work with, how to put pressure on them to enact policies like this to make the space safer.
Yeah. So one thing you can do is buy a copy of my book and hand it to them. Say, this is really cool. You guys should look into this. Even just the pocket guide, give it to just the friendliest bartender or whatever. There's always one person where you're like, I think this person has my back, and try to get them on your side. Another way is when and if harassment does happen, I can say, this thing just happened to me. What are you going to do about it? I have something to point to. So I like to use any situation for the better when possible, right? Because we don't always get a chance. So if there is a silver lining out of a harassment experience, it's that you can be like, okay, see, it happened. What are you going to do? Use it as an opportunity to make your case. But I think a lot of times people that are resistant, I think their heart is in the right place most of the time. They might just think that everything is fine, and well, that doesn't really happen here. Our clientele is great. No one's ever complained about it before, that kind of stuff. And the answer to that is that you know of. It's happening. They just don't trust you to tell you. So I'm telling you now, venue that I like or deal with because I like that one craft beer you have. It's happening, and you should probably at least put up a damn sign that says you don't tolerate harassment. That's not so. I'll print them out for you. Make it easy on people. But it's having those conversations and letting people know that it does happen, and there are easy things they can do to help curb it.
So, as somebody who's so entrenched in the DIY community and the punk scene and all that, is public office something that you have ever considered?
Hell no. No.
I had to ask.
No. I've found something that I love doing that makes a difference, and I wouldn't give that up. I love putting on workshops and training people and doing even Skyping and doing online feminist coaching, like life coaching, consulting, all that kind of stuff, like helping someone or a group or a business make their lives more like feminist and more equal for everyone. That's just my favorite thing, and I don't want to raise money to do that. I feel like that's what politics is. It's just raising money, and I obviously don't like money very much. I'm on food stamps, and I work as much as I can to just be able to go on tour, So, no, but thank you. Did anyone notice that you held the mic like a hardcore singer? I got a question. Yeah. You in a band?
Hello. Thank you again for doing this. I just wanted to ask, I work in sort of bigger venues, and a lot of times bringing stuff up like this to people in charge or people who that's most relevant to gets sort of pushed off to the side. And I wonder if you have had any experience working in smaller venues versus working in larger scale venues, and sort of what you've found is more effective in getting people or venues where like the holes in the net are larger to care more.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think larger venues are more worried about getting sued just for any random thing or insurance claims. And so sometimes they're kind of doing some of the right stuff out of fear, but they're doing it. And then smaller places don't have to worry about that, but the people might care more about putting these things into effect. So I think any group of people, whatever the size, I'm going to get them on board with me. We're gonna take this journey. They're going to learn something. They're going to know what to do when they leave the workshop. But I do think for larger venues, it does have to come from the top down. But the cool thing is that you working there, you can be my little spy. You can be the infiltrator. You can know all the stuff in this book and just sneak that information out there when it comes up, or maybe you gently bring it up. And you know what I was reading the other day? And if you're anything like me, if you know this stuff, you become the point person for this stuff. Then people start coming to you. What would you do in this situation? What should I do if this happens? And that's, again, that starts down here, and eventually that's going to change the whole culture, hopefully. So if you get more of your teammates, lateral teammates, like on your side, and you become like this person they can trust with this information, then there's power in numbers, and then maybe a group of you can go to the higher ups. So it'll take more time, maybe, but it's worth it.
Have you had the opportunity to revisit any of these teams you've worked with to see the cultural shift, and what does that look like?
Some I have, some I haven't. I am spread really thin, and I don't always get paid for doing these workshops. Honestly, I've started to make sure I pay myself only like the last year or so. And I think now that I have a book, I can be like, pay my rent, which is nice for an artist who's you just think, well, I'm supposed to be starving, right? Because that's the thing. How am I going to create anything if I'm not hungry all the time? So some places I know, some places I frequent, especially in Baltimore, my town, I train my friends sometimes, right? And so it's cool to be able to go into those spots and see what they're doing, see my posters up, and know that everyone knows what's up. And then some spots I lose contact with and hope for the best and hope no one says, that place you trained is really messed up. You might want to deal with that. But it has happened a couple times, and I reach out and say, you got a problem, we gotta handle it. And I go back in, and usually it means another training, or really it starts with a debriefing, like, okay, tell me your side. You didn't do well handling an incident. Tell me what happened from your view. Okay, here's what you should have done, or here's what you could have done better, or here's what you were lacking, and here's what you can do right now to try to make it right with the people that were affected. And I think some people would say, screw that place, and they messed up, cancel culture, we're done with them, I'm never going there again. That's fine. You don't have to go there again. Other people will. Why not keep working to make it better? Like, that's literally my job. One of my jobs. That's one of my jobs, is to make places better so that anyone going there can feel safer. And of course, people are going to stumble sometimes, but they can always do better moving forward. And I am happy to help with that. But overall, success stories, which is good. Any other questions? These are great, by the way. Thank you so much for engaging with me.
Hi. So where do we draw the line between holding someone accountable versus what you would call quote unquote cancel culture. Do we ever forgive harassers? Should we?
I think it just depends. Like, every instance is nuanced, and there's going to be different circumstances, and who you are in that situation will always be different. You know, you could be the victim, you could be the victim's friend or partner or family, you could be the friend of the harasser, you could be just someone who saw it on Twitter and wants to be upset, and there are a number of reactions for all those positions that are valid, you know. But I always come back to the idea of, what's the goal? What are we aiming for here? What's the point? And for me, the point is to have a world free of violence. That's a big ask, but how do we get there? How do we have less violence in the world? We have to undo all the learning that we've been doing subconsciously, consciously since birth. All the messages, we have to counteract all the messages given by society, counteract peer pressure, and it's a lot. And so until we all really start working together on this, right, and we all have the same skills in this book, it feels like we're on our own. We're up against this big enemy of violence. That means we just have to work hard. And so sometimes that means being patient with someone that's caused harm. And if the goal really is for a less violent world, that might mean sitting down and having a conversation with that person, or getting someone close to them to do it, taking that extra step, finding a bunch of resources for them, like therapy, counseling, groups, and giving it to them, and talking to them and telling them how important it is to you that they get some help and figure out what they need to unlearn to stop behaving this way. So from the fringes, I can easily say, well, I don't ever need to talk to that person, because I already don't really know them anyway. I wasn't really talking to them anyway. I'm not invested, and that's fine. It's kind of on the people closest to the person causing harm to take that up. And if they really care about their friend, they're going to want their friend to do better and do better by others.
Let's give it up for Shawna.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me.